Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this edition of Grassroots Racing Show.
Welcome to the Grassroots Racing Show. I'm your co-host Doug Thompson with my brother Roger Thompson. We have a very, very special guest came in today to the Kansas Auto Racing Museum from Wichita, Bob Lawrence. Bob, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you all. Good to be here.
You have a website that everybody who's involved in racing needs to go take a look at. What's the website?
It's kansasracinghistory.com.
And you created it?
I did.
Where did you get all the material that goes on there?
Basically from the racers. Go and spend a lot of time in libraries, going through old newspapers, things like that. My very first, when I decided to be a racing historian, the first person I went to see was a neighbor of mine named Red Forshey. And he was a car owner at the time and very nice to me, gave me a lot of material to use and encouraged me. He said, yeah, stay with this history stuff. He said, that's a good field for you to be in.
Well, why'd you get the passion for it? I mean, what caused it to say, I've retired from doing my job and I'm going to do this? What caused that to happen?
Well, actually, I wasn't retired at that time, so I was doing of an evening and weekends and the like. I had raced myself years ago, back in the 60s and 70s. Got away from racing for several years, and just you never get away from it. In particular, I had grown up in Winfield, and Winfield had a racetrack. I saw my first race there in 1954, and I thought, one night I was laying in bed and thought, well, I wonder if I saw the first race ever run at Winfield. So I went looking, and I found out that the technique used to research that type of thing was basically the same as used in genealogy, and I'd done a lot of that, so it was very easy for me to do that kind of research. So I just got started on it. No, I didn't see the first race run at Winfield. The first one was run in 1909, long before my time. I just happened to see one in 1954 and fell in love with it.
Roger and I were in that first race at Winfield in 1909.
There you go.
Careful, he's younger than we are.
Yeah, I know it. When you drove your car, what did you race? What class? What was your car number?
I run semi-lates, and my first car number was 4. Semi-lates were at Wichita, was a class that they ran there, and that my first car number was 4. It was the first number that was available. 1, 2, and 3 were taken, so 4 was mine. As the years went by, I drove for a lot of different car owners, and I just raced whatever number they had on the car.
Well, that's because drivers in those days couldn't count past 4.
There you go.
I thought you were going to say, Roger, that's why everybody was so mad at you when you pulled down with the 4 car because of what Bob did down at the track.
Well, it could be.
I've gone to your website, kansasracinghistory.com, and the first thing, of course, I see is Bob Lawrence's Vintage Auto Racing Web Ring. And then there's some choices to go to.
And yes, if you take the links one, of course, links to other websites, you can jump ahead to any of those sites that you'll see.
All right, we'll check that out. Let's see. Grassroots Racing TV show. I like that link.
There you go. I just went on this morning.
Did you go check it out?
I put that link on my webpage this morning.
Well, is that ours?
Yeah, that's ours. Hello. And then the Kansas Auto Racing Museum. I like that one too because we're, of course, filming the Grassroots Racing Show as we almost always do right here at the Auto Racing Museum. Yeah, that's ours too.
Yep.
And you got some neat links.
Well, he's a nicer guy than I thought he was.
Oh, way nicer, way nicer. Yeah. You invite him to the show, he'll go back and put a link on for you.
There you go.
And put you on. Well, Bob, you got all kinds of stuff up here, and I can tell you from just looking at this, and this is amazing. You know, we've seen pictures. We were looking at Frankie Lease earlier. Roger had him up on the website, and we were taking a look. It's amazing. I don't know where you got all those pictures. Do families sometimes give them to you? Or?
They loaned them to me. The Frank Lease family did after Frank had passed away. There's a whole room of their house that's nothing but Frank's trophies and scrapbooks and the like. And they said, well, I had a van, but I couldn't get it all in there once. They said, well, take 5 or 6 books at a time. And that's what I did, and I copied them all. And then I used that for the webpage for Frank Lease. I also did 2 interviews with him before he passed away. So you'll find some of those stories on there about Frank Lease. Well, they came from Frank Lease. He told me about them himself.
Man, that's interesting. And from there, you just sort of began to expand. Did you go backwards first and go back in history and say, when's the first race in Kansas? Or did you take the recent material and then go the opposite direction?
Basically what I did was do the Winfield one first. And there is a history of racing at Winfield. And as I did, I met more people involved in racing. And as I would talk to them, they're like, well, here, I've got pictures or I've got newspaper clippings and the like, and I would go through those, make copies. Well, I've got enough information here to make a web page about this or that, this particular driver or that particular race. Or for instance, you can find racing there at Arkansas City. There were 2 different tracks in Ark City. Well,
and I want to go to that one as soon as we come back from break. We got to cut away. Bob Lawrence doesn't come cheap, so we got to go pay some bills. See you right after the break.
You're watching the Grassroots Racing Show.
Welcome back to the Grassroots Racing Show. I'm Doug Thompson with co-host Roger Thompson and our special guest Bob Lawrence. And Bob, we were just talking a little bit about, I think you just said that, well, I couldn't sleep one night. I was laying there wondering when the first race was at Winfield. And that sort of got you into the history of it. And as you started looking into the history of auto racing, you realized there was a very rich racing history that nobody had
worked on.
Okay.
That's one reason why you don't see very much about the Indianapolis 500 on my website. Everybody's already done it. You can find information on the Indy 500 almost anywhere, but not on my website, because I try to find original stuff that you don't find in other places. Call it stuff, but anyway, this is about Kansas racing that you just don't find unless you go digging through the sources.
Yeah, and you mentioned, of course, the Indy 500. Kansas has the most Indy 500 winners. Don't they?
Were born here or lived here at one time
Okay.
or another.
Who
They
are
actually didn't. I don't think any of them lived here when they won the Indy 500.
No, I think that's true.
They had moved to other places, but there were a lot of them that were born here. And in fact, at one time, I lived 2 houses away from where Rick and Roger Mears grew up.
Oh, they're in Wichita. You
In
know, we
Wichita.
have at the Kansas Auto Racing Museum, we have Bill Mears, his first trophy he won back in '47. I don't remember the year that he moved the family out to Bakersfield, but they were pretty young kids, Roger and Rick, when they moved.
That was all a racing family. Bill was of course, the father of Rick and Roger. He was also a nephew of Will Forrest, who was a big-time racer in Wichita.
Did not know that.
Yeah, and he was a part of the Forrest family. His mother was a Forrest, and
That was in the 50s and early 60s, wasn't it, for Will Forrest?
correct.
Yeah.
He was from the 50s. In fact, he won the second Nationals. Frank Reese won the first one, and Will Forrest won the second. No, third. Sorry, in 1959 anyway, he won the Nationals at Hutchinson.
We had that coupe in here. That was that red and white coupe that his brother built for him. Is that the right one?
Well, it was an Ernie McCoy car.
Yeah.
And there's a picture of it. I saw it back over here just a little bit ago.
Yeah.
It's number 4. It was owned by Ernie McCoy. Ernie was a flathead Ford specialist, and he could build flathead Fords like very few people, and they went really fast.
We
Yeah,
had
they
one.
did.
We had that 4A was a Ernie McCoy. Had,
You won like 33 features in a row with that
yes,
car.
we did. People hated us.
Yeah.
It wasn't the car they hated so much, Roger.
No, it was me. Obnoxious kid at that time.
Well, okay, and now so let's go back to some of the history. When was the first auto racing event held in Kansas?
Okay, the first race that we can find that was actually scheduled to be run in Kansas was in 1900, and it was to be run in Topeka. Problem is, they only had one car showed up. Can't have a car race with just one car.
Yeah, pretty tough.
So it got canceled. The next one scheduled was in Iola, Kansas in 1901, and no cars showed up. One motorcycle did, so they said, well, let's switch it to a motorcycle race. But they hunted the rest of the day and couldn't find another motorcycle to race against it. So that race got canceled. So the actual first race that happened in Kansas took place at the Topeka Fairgrounds in front of the grandstands there on that old half-mile track in 1902, in September of 1902. And there were 4 cars entered. Actually, the first day of the fair, of the Topeka Fair, they had the races, and there were only 3 cars entered. And the fair said, no, we have to have 4 to pay the purse. We have to have 4. And so they waited till the last day of the fair, rescheduled them. They had their 4 cars, and they did do the race.
With 4 cars?
With 4 cars. And James Paget won it, and he was driving a Durgay, and he later became a Durgay dealer in Topeka.
Really? So he was from the Topeka area?
He was a Topeka driver, and the second place car finished at least on the lead lap, and then the last 2 cars were on laps down, if you were laps behind.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a real close race, but That was it. Duryea was an entrepreneur, not Duryea. Paget was a entrepreneur. He had a lot of businesses. In about 1910, he hired a nephew to run all of his business interests in Topeka, and Paget retired to California. And so he lived out his years in California. And
you know, you brought up about the racing in those early days. We've seen, of course, with the Auto Racing Museum, we've seen lots of cars from the early days. And those guys didn't have roll cages, Nerf bars. They didn't have helmets with the straps. They didn't have the chest. They didn't have seat belts. That's right. We remember how the seat belts kind of got started. And they were man, you were just hanging on to the wheel.
And unfortunately, a lot of them died because of that.
They did.
There was a very primitive time in auto racing.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. These stories that we're talking about here, would a person be able to go to your website and find that information?
I haven't said anything yet that's not on my website.
How many pages do you have on your website?
More than 3,000.
3,000 pages.
And if you take the web ring through, it'll take you to the front page of each one of the different stories. We were talking about, for instance, the Winfield website. Well, there's over 100 pages on the Winfield website. So if you go to the front page of it, you want to read about Winfield, of course, start in, look at the old pictures. If you want to leave the Winfield one, well, you leave about 100 pages behind and jumps to the next subject. So, and you can do that, but you don't have to go through 3,000 pages to go all the way around to come back.
Wow.
As a web ring, it will come back to where you started.
You must have a whole army of people that maintain this website for you.
Army of one.
Army of one. And that army of one is Bob?
That's me.
Man, oh man, what a labor of love that you've done. I'm guessing that there's people that do research. Matter of fact, we had a young man come out here, Steve
Marston,
thank you. And working on his doctorates, I think from KU, came out and did some research here. And I know he was in contact with you, and he got a wealth of information from you.
He did?
Because he was interested in the early racing at Belleville and some of the other tracks. Do you know the history of racing at Belleville too?
A little bit. They, as you know, they had the Centennial up there recently for a couple of years ago for racing at Belleville, and I did the research for the man that put it on right now. Wayne Dake put those races on, and I did the research for him. And got him really interested in it, and he even took it further than I did after the race had been run. But I did the research on that, so yes, I'm familiar with that.
We're going to cut away and take a break. When we come back, we're going to finish up visiting with Bob Lawrence.
This is Dan Wall with Fuels for Racing, and you're watching my favorite show, Grassroots Racing.
Welcome back to the Grassroots Racing Show. I'm your co-host, Doug Thompson, with my brother Roger, and we're with Bob Lawrence, historian, knows absolutely everything about racing in Kansas. Well, knows a lot more than anybody else does. And we had to come back out of break because we were just talking and getting out so much good information. Well, we said we better go back and put this on camera because we're having a really good time. And I'm glad you're watching. Thank you for watching the Grassroots Racing Show. You've supported it now for years, and we thank you for doing so. Bob, we were talking a little bit, and Roger started telling you about that out at our own track, we own Whiskey Lake Raceway.
But first of all, he was talking about the early races when they'd only have one car or two car, and then they had to cancel the races. That's how we got into this conversation.
Well, so out at our own track, you were probably the announcer that did this, so what happened?
You talked to me? The guys were slow getting out there to the race. You know, we'd have a heat race scheduled, and we'd call everybody to come out for the heat race. And they were slow. So whoever the announcer was just went ahead and talked as if the race was going on.
Green flags out,
the cars are headed into the cars are there. There's 3 wide going into turn 1 and car number such and such, you know, and the crowd really liked it. As a matter of fact, after the races, some people wanted to know if during the winter, when there was no races, they would come out and we could go ahead and run races in the snow, the verbal races like that. But it did give the guys out there a little faster.
Yeah,
we go to the second heat, you know. Sure.
Yeah. And so that it made it fun for the fans. And I was thinking about it when we were talking about that during the break. I want to say it was during the baseball strike, and I think it happened in San Francisco. And they said we're going to have a ball game out, an imaginary ball game. And so they had like 28,000 people showed up for the ball game, knowing that there wasn't a ball game. And so the announcer, the regular announcer that they had, you know, started at 10, coming to the plate, you know, you're so-and-so. And, drive way out there, you know, and the crowd just cheered and carried on every play and booed when they would boo when the home team, you know, when it didn't go right. Bad call, you know. And they did the whole game, and they had a huge party because everybody went out for imaginary ball game because they were missing it. So that's why I was thinking about it when Roger was telling the story about the announcer calling the race that never happened.
Jack Merrick used to put on races in western Kansas, and he would only have 6 or 7 cars sometimes show up at his races. But he was a great announcer. He could take all day introducing the people and make the people feel like they were entertained. And each driver, as they came out, he would introduce them one at a time and go through a whole long list of the races they had run, all their championships. Now, most of them hadn't won any, but it was all totally fabricated by Jack. But he could talk all afternoon and entertain the crowd, and they would run a few car races, and that was it.
He was a showman.
He was.
When I started racing down, well, you've been racing there already at the Nationals, at the fairgrounds. I always enjoyed it because there was so much pageantry went with it, that there was just the pre-race events, and you got trophies over here of you winning one of the features, Roger, and there's a couple trophy girls with you and great big trophies.
And they used to sit in convertibles, and there'd be convertibles of women running around
and
there.
They would tour the track and they'd usher them on out. And, and then the trophies they gave away. I won the Nationals a couple times, so I got some trophies that are 5 feet tall from there. And it's amazing. It was really a good event, and it was filmed, and it was just a good show.
I never did any good there. I was always waving at the girls.
There you go.
We go down the straightaway, and you're waving and carrying on.
Then you did the back of the pack because he missed the starting of the field.
Yeah, and unfortunately, they weren't waving back.
No, they probably weren't waving back.
We ought to give some credit here where it's due. That pageantry came from Jack's wife, Esther.
Really?
And she would plan them, all the beauty pageants and the cars, the Corvettes and all. That was all choreographed by Esther.
A lot of times she'd have the girls would be in gowns and
they would. They had a whole contest. They sure did.
Well, I didn't know that, but it was quite a thing.
Yep.
And I'm scrolling through as we're looking at this because you'll be able to catch some of this on the screen. We'll put some of the information out about the website. Give the website again, would you please?
It's kansasracinghistory.com. It's written all as one word.
And they can see races from where? Everywhere?
Well, there's some outside of Kansas. Basically, if I had enough information, and especially if there were Kansas people involved in them, you'll see some of that. But it's mostly Kansas racing, from coast to coast, from border to border.
Border to border.
Colorado, I did out Ulysses, Oakley. There's quite a bit about the racing out in those directions, or Coffeyville on the east.
You've done some of it in Springfield too, Missouri, haven't you?
A little bit, because the Springfield drivers would come to Coffeyville and race.
Yeah.
And they did real well there. So
Al Perky in that area.
There you go. He was from Coffeyville,
really well.
but yes, and he did real well over there. Yes, but there was Coffeyville has a very rich history of racing.
They do. I've raced at Coffeyville a number of times, and it's tough competition. Bob Perky used to run there, Al's dad, and of course some others. I don't remember their names now, but it was always good racing. I'd go down there at the end of the year.
Well, it's a lot safer town now that they got rid of the Daltons.
There you go.
The Daltons are gone?
Yeah, the Daltons aren't there anymore.
I didn't.
Actually, they're buried there.
So I'm sure there's some of their family there watching.
But also they raced at Caney. I have quite a bit about stuff from Caney.
Yeah.
So I really try to spread out across the whole city, the whole state, and spend some time doing racing from all of those places.
I was talking with somebody yesterday a little bit about, they asked about how the races, a visitor to the museum, about how the racing industry is, and I said, well, there used to be 33 tracks probably across Kansas, and I said now there's maybe 6 tracks that are still actively open and racing on not necessarily a regular basis, but what do you see for the racing industry now as compared to what it used to be?
I don't have good things to say, unfortunately, about that. The cost of racing has put a lot of people out of the sport just because they can't afford it. Insurance costs are the primary reason why that's happened, and I don't see those trends reversing. And I find it in my own kids and grandkids as they're not interested in the racing anymore.
I would agree with you. I hope you've enjoyed this segment of the Grassroots Racing Show, and welcome to the 2016 season. We've had a good time visiting with Bob Lawrence. You can check out his website. The information's on the screen. Thank you so much, Bob.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you for having me.
There is exciting racing action every week on Grassroots Racing Show Night at the Track. You don't want to miss a single episode. If you miss any of the shows, be sure to look us up on Facebook or at grassrootsracing.org.